Hey, I'm Seth Johnson with Land House, and you are watching the Playhouse Build Series. Now it's time to build the trusses for the playhouse. Now, right from the very start, I want to give a disclaimer that these trusses are going on an 8x8 playhouse. They're not designed to be on a house or a large building or barn, so keep that in mind as I show you how I build these. Now, you may think it's kind of strange to build the trusses at this stage where we just have the platform, but it's actually a lot easier to assemble them whenever you have this platform. Now, if you've got your carport or some other flat surface, then you can go ahead and move on to the walls and then the trusses. But whenever I'm out here in the woods, I'm gonna go ahead and do the trusses next so I can use my platform to assemble them. To begin, I have a 10-foot 2x4. It's not treated, and I'm gonna be using 7 of these total. I have all 7 2x4s up here in my shop where I'm going to be making all of my cuts. Whenever you make a truss, the roof pitch is going to be something kind of like that, and you'll see there's a lot of excess material in there, and so these need to actually butt up together. So we have to make that cut. The first method would be to take a speed square, place it on the corner here, and then turn it until you see 22.5 degrees. And it's not entirely accurate, but it will give you the angle there that you need. So if I mark that, that's the 22.5. So if I did that with another one, they would butt up together and give me that angle. For a higher level of accuracy, I have my miter saw set up at 22.5 degrees. And I'm going to use a stop block set up here to make sure my board meets up where I want it every time. And then I'm just going to cut off that end on all 7 of these boards. Now that all 7 boards have had one end cut off, I've removed the block that was holding here. So now I can take a board again, put it on the saw, and I want to find the halfway point, which is 5 feet. So I'm just going to measure out from the end that hasn't been cut and find 5 feet. Now, once again, if you don't have a miter saw, you can take your speed square and place it on the point there at the halfway mark, and you can rotate this out again and find your 22.5 and make your mark, and that's where you would cut there at the halfway point. But because I have a miter saw, I'm going to come back and just cut with the same direction that was cut on the first one. Just line this up at the halfway point. I've cut a second one just for demonstration purposes here. If you were to lay this out like this, as if it were the playhouse truss, this piece is now cut and also down here at the bottom, so that whenever we put fascia board on, it will not be at an angle, but will be flat there. So if I were to take both of these and then line them up, put them together, that would be the angle or the pitch there of our playhouse roof. With that being said, we also have to cut the other end of our board that we have just made. And so it's pretty simple and easy to do. I'm just going to take the board and turn it around so that the long end on one side is the short end on the other. What I mean by that is, notice how the board goes short here and long here. So if I move this back down, this cut is going to make it long here and short back here. And once again, we could probably use our stop block to make sure that this is going to be consistent on all of the cuts so that it hits this corner and we don't waste any material. Now that I have all the boards cut through the middle with that same angle, I just continue to slide the board through and I will cut the other end at that same angle. And to do this, I'm going to actually be swapping over my guide here. Swapping over my stop block so that I can make sure all of these cuts are consistent. To keep the two pieces of the trusses together, I'm going to be using gussets. This is just plywood. It's actually left over from the platform of the Playhouse. And to make it, let me show you what I did. I simply lay out the two trusses and I put the plywood underneath the trusses and I marked out. And then I brought the angle down just a little bit so that none of the material would be sticking up on top of the truss. And that's important for when we put the roof on. This one is going to be 15 inches long by 6 inches tall. So I took my gusset board and I set it into the saw and I lined up that cut with my saw. Looks like it was close to 24 degrees or so, just slightly down from our previous cuts. And once that was done, I cinched down this board over here to hold this in place, and then I was able to make my cut. So let's go ahead and make one of these real quick. I want to measure 6 inches here, move over, 6 inches again, use a straight edge to connect those two. Then just using the circular saw, I'm going to cut this out. Next, I'm going to find the midpoint, which is 15 inches in my case. This is the point where you would take this underneath the truss and get those angles. But since I already have my template, I'm just going to line this up and mark it on both sides. The reason I'm going to mark it on both sides is because I'm going to keep the saw in the same position and just flip the board over. Now I can take my gusset board here, place it into the saw, and then line up my marker here. And then I'm going to take this other board here and just cinch this down to hold my gusset into place. Then just turn this over and around so we can keep the saw in the same position, which definitely helps with consistency. Match this one up. Now that I have all the materials cut, it's time to get things assembled. I'm going to be using a little jig here out of a couple of 2x4s and some clamps. So I've marked out where I want to have the center point of my truss here, and I'm just going to lock this down with a clamp, and it's between these two other pieces here as guides, which means I can come over here and lock down the other side. So I just want to line up the top pieces down here, get the angle right so that everything is nice and flush. Then I can lock that into place with a clamp. And then for all the future trusses, I want to put these little blocks in here to make sure I have a consistent truss as I go down the line. Okay, there we go. Now that I have this thing lined up where I want it, it's time to get the gusset installed. To do that, I'm going to place my gusset here on the truss, and line up where I want it to be. Just kind of make a mark on the back side. That's where I want to keep my construction adhesive in. I'm just using this liquid nails. I find this to be some pretty good stuff. I'm just going to put a pretty good bit in here. This is going to be what really holds stuff together and keeps this very strong. Place that back here. Now it's really important that you make sure to keep this about a ½ inch down from the top, because when you go to put your roof material on, you don't want this interfering. I'm going to hold this in place with some 2-inch screws. Now it's time to flip this over. I'm just going to remove the clamp that's holding the trusses in place. Now because the gusset is here, it's going to be 3/4 of an inch taller. So I have these spacer pieces of plywood, and I'm just going to pull this up out of the jig. Put that spacer down in there in the hole. So now I can flip this over and do the other side. The reason I marked the topmost point is so that I can get this thing lined right back up where it needs to be here. Just going to repeat that same step. Line up the middle, come down about a ½ inch, mark where it needs to go, construction adhesive, put this back into place, make sure it's down about a ½ inch. I'm going to let this cure for several days so that it is nice and strong. And of course we have to build the walls of the playhouse next, so this should have plenty of time to do its thing. Now that I have the first one done and the jig in the right spot, it's just a matter of resetting the boards and continuing on down until I have all of these finished. Now the last 2 trusses only have a single gusset plate, and that's because it's going to be the ladder or the end of the roof. And so in order to put on the fascia board, I don't want to have one of these sticking out past my 2x4, because I want to put a flush piece on this truss. So anyway, keep that in mind, and that's why we didn't make 14 gusset plates, we just made the 12. And here is the completed stack of trusses for this playhouse. I've got the 2 with a single gusset, and then the others here are all lined up. The adhesive hasn't cured yet. I just wanted to show you what this is going to look like as if this were the top of the playhouse. There you go. So that's the pitch of the roof right there. Should look quite nice. And we're going to have somewhere around 6 inches of overhang on each side. This video is kind of anticlimactic because we aren't going to be using this until we have the rest of the playhouse built. But as you saw, it's nice to have a flat surface to work with, and a lot of times you can work on the base of your playhouse if you're going to be doing this without a nice flat surface like in my shop. So that's the reason I do this step now instead of later. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button and be sure to subscribe. If you are enjoying this project, then definitely share with all your friends. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.